My guest today is writer-director Matthew Paul Everett, and he is the director of the acclaimed short film You Can Go Home Whenever You Want, developed with the Sundance Institute and winner of the 2024 Best Dramatic Short at the Independent Film Festival. Now, his other work includes the short film A Waffle Home in 2022 and Benny Blue's comedy special Live from My Mother's Funeral and directing music videos for various artists. Now, as a dedicated member of the Grand Rapids Film Society, Matthew is passionate about creating opportunities for filmmakers to collaborate and build roots in the Midwest while providing unique theatrical experiences for the community. And he is also the co-founder of Snowy in August, a production company specializing in short films and removing barriers for first-time filmmakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome writer-director Matthew Paul Everett and his short film, You Can Go Home Whenever You Want, to the show. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm going to start right off because I'm really interested. You're in Michigan. What is it like being a filmmaker in the upper Midwest when you're basically dead center between LA, New York, and you're almost bordering Chicago? How does that work?
That's a big question. Personally, I love it. Uh, like any filmmaker, I've contemplated moving multiple times. I lived in Chicago for a while, and life kind of brought me to Grand Rapids, and it was at the right time where there's a shift in how conversations happen, how business is done, and more of my friends who had moved to LA were starting to move back for a variety of reasons. And by the time I was like pretty sure moving would be the right way to go, the pandemic happened and it just shifted everything. And so, honestly, there's never been a better time to be a filmmaker, um, whether it's Michigan or Oklahoma or Montana. We've really felt and seen a shift in how production's being done. And so, here where we're at in Grand Rapids, we have every part of the crew you could ever want. We have great talent. And so, when it's time to get going on another project, you have incredible resources ready to go without the limitations you'll find in bigger cities where there's kind of a competition for people's time. And LA is notorious for not being the most cost effective place to shoot. And when you're in Michigan and you're like, hey, I've got a film I want to shoot, people are often uh, say yes before you can even offer any cash, or they're putting up any barriers. And so uh, it's a pretty special place.
Well, that's really, really cool because, I know so many people who have moved out of LA mostly because of the cost factor and mostly the cost factor in the areas of filmmaking. Now you can live anywhere and do a film. And like you said, even the local communities get really excited. And sometimes even cash isn't even traded hands. Sometimes it's a barter system, or they're just like, no, yeah, you go ahead and use this. They're just happy to supply things. So it's great to be filming in the local community. And that's what brings me up to this incredible film that you did called You Can Go Home Whenever You Want. And this film, as many of the films that I have seen, this film is very complex, which I like, emotionally complex, but yet conflicted is what I would call it. How did you come up with such a story?
Whew, through many revisions, honestly. Actually, before this conversation, I went back and read the first draft just to kind of understand how I got here because the journey's so uh, there's so many complications when you try and make a film that it's really easy to forget how you got started. And it is a mixture of, being in Michigan, and when you cross a certain point going north, the air changes and it feels different up there. And so my wife and I camp a lot. And on one trip, we we're just walking in the woods, and the idea popped in my head of, what if there's a natural place where the barrier between Earth and whatever comes next was particularly thin, and what would happen? Would people treat it any different? Would it uh, it kind of become a tourist attraction? Would it become like a little secret that only the townies know? And that thought was the beginning of everything that you saw in the short as it was finished. And so once that idea was there, it was a matter of like, well, what kind of characters do I find the most interesting? And working with those characters, and then finding ways to have the conversations. I love dialogue. I love big ideas. Um, I went to seminary for a couple years, and so a lot of those themes that come up in home uh, found their foundation back when I was in college. And so it's kind of like the Tarantino approach to filmmaking, but with more spiritually minded films, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, see, now it's all coming together when I'm seeing this, because this film was shows transcendence, it's mortality, it's questioning eternal life, it's questioning life on Earth. There's a what's that? There was a song from the '80s. Stop the world, I want to get off. And
Yep.
so it's kind of like actually that was Randy Stonehill, if I remember that correctly. Um, and that's what this film is like. It's like some of the people that would come to. Now, did you have a name for the custodian?
Yes. Yes. It's on the birthday cake. His first name's Calvin, which is
Calvin. Okay, okay. Because when I saw the closed captioning, they left the V out, so that explains a lot.
yeah.
Okay, so
No,
with Calvin, I loved his character, and because you're so focused on him, I think one reason why the audience becomes so focused on him is because he's so focused on the people that come to him, because you can see it in his eyes. And so we're looking at him the same way he's looking at them, which I found very different because you don't get that feeling in most films. So there's this
yeah.
little triangle effect that you created, that maybe you knew you created it or you unknowingly created it, but it just simply works. And because I kept watching, I went back. It's probably the third time I watched the film. I went back and I was like, okay. So, especially when the people are the first ones that are coming into him, and they're choosing the path to the top of the hill, and that's how I'll put it. And but there's this whole sequence, and I want you to kind of walk us through it, because these people would come to him, they would give him a memento. They would get their picture taken, Polaroid, and then they would walk up the hill. But then a missing person sign is created. Now, I would stop it, and I'm looking. I'm like, okay, I get the memento thing, and I get the photo thing, but and to me, the photo thing was more of, I don't know if it was because Calvin found a way so these people are not completely forgotten.
Hmm.
Um, but then I'm a bit stumped about the missing person sign. Is there a metaphor there that I'm missing?
No, there's not anything intentional that you're missing. One of the most rewarding parts of this film has been discovering the connections and thoughts that I didn't never happened to cross my mind when we were making it. I will say, when it comes to the photos that he takes, that is something he does for himself to kind of provide meaning to his time out there, where he can look at all the people that he's helped. Whether it is actually helping or not, that's up to the viewer. But he's a man that spends his time at the threshold of whatever comes next, but never participates in it. And there's a part of him, there's a whole backstory that Michael B. Woods, the actor who plays Calvin, and I have developed and talked through. And so, it starts with someone he did visit it for himself at one point, but didn't go up. Saw a little bit of a mess that someone left behind and tidies it up because this is a special moment for people and it should be as nice as it can be. He goes back home, but then he's curious again, sees more litter, and eventually inserts himself into this process for his own reasons. And so these pictures provide a sense of direction and meaning and value to his time, where he can feel important and valuable to these people. And for the missing posters, those, in my mind, were usually put up by the family members. But there's also a world where Calvin would create these as a calling card. Because in the earlier drafts of the script, he would go into town and put business cards around saying, if you're ready to go home, come here. And that's initially how word got out. And then there's a whole scene that I had written that we couldn't shoot where a family is there confronting him for letting one of their family members go. Um, and so, yeah, there's a very, very rich world that even at 26 minutes for a short film, we weren't really able to explore fully.
See, but see, here's the cool thing. See, I had that thought. I was like, okay, because when you take one of the beginning scenes in the film where you framed it to where Calvin's on the right, the other person's on the left, you have the window in the center that shows leading up to the hill. You see this exchange going, but on the wall behind Calvin is a certificate of ministry, which I was like, huh. That was interesting due to the fact that Calvin never tried to stop him. Because when I thought of that, I said, okay, if somebody's claiming to be a true minister, the minister would talk them out and said, look, there's a better way, everything's going to work out, blah blah blah. He never did that. So when I looked at it, I was like, wait a minute. But God gave us free will. Calvin's allowing the free will to happen.
You've touched on something pretty rich there. I would say his the liturgy that he runs through with the people, the recitations, are his effort to be like, are you sure? Are you certain? And so that's his way of trying to talk them out of it. And for me, you know, the, I approach the topic as this is not a film about suicide, and I don't believe these people are actually committing suicide when they go up to the hill. And this might be splitting hairs, but again,
Well,
from my
no, I get why
perspective,
you're saying it because at first I was like, this is not pro suicide because here is this. I'm trying to think of terrestrial portal. We'll call it
yeah,
that. If there's a terrestrial portal that some of these people understand is in the forest, and there are people that come to it but that would never think in their mind that I'm going to take my own life. But here is an avenue in which I can take that is peaceful, causes no harm. And so that's how I looked at it. Because at first I was like, well, would some people misinterpret this film? And have you gotten questions like that at film festivals?
yes, that was very much on my mind. I've done work for mental health organizations. It's something very close to my heart, and at no way would I ever want to say, "Hey, living, suicide, it's the same side of the coin." Whatever. Um, and we did a lot of research about suicidal behavior, and the thing that stuck out to me the most was when they're talking about people who would jump from bridges as a way of ending their life. Anytime there was a boat nearby and they had hit the water, everyone would reach for the boat. At one point, when they're at the top of the bridge, they're ready to go. But by the time they're in the water, they're like, I've changed my mind. And it was that process of what happens to people to make them change their mind that was at the core of Kelvin's liturgy and what happens at the top of the hill. Um, it takes a lot of energy and volition to go from the bottom to the top. Every step is intentional. There's no way to accidentally change your mind. And so, in these characters to me, where people, whether it was from disease or depression or other struggles, were like, I no longer have the energy to carry forward. And right now, I'm ready to just not wake up again. And so, to me, that's a different emotion than being overwhelmed in the moment and reaching for a drastic action at then. And that's not, I didn't want to make this a thing where, you know, people are taking drastic action and they'll regret it. Everything about that process was intentional and methodical.
Yeah, but here's one thought on that. They're having to walk up the hill, and it's really not. It's not a short walk. It's long enough for the person to go, I changed my mind, because they have free will. They have the right to change their mind. They're not at the top of the hill yet, and it's like that. It's like when Brent showed up. Out of the three or four men that showed up, Brent was the one that was really struggling the most. He was there. He was, I guess I can only call it scared. And he held on to the rosary, which I thought was a really nice touch, by the way. And because he even told Calvin, he goes, just I won't drop it, which I thought was an odd statement. And so I'm thinking, I won't drop it, which means either you've been there before and changed your mind, or you've heard things. But then when he went up there, then it was like what the next day, then Calvin goes up there and he retrieves the rosary from the tree. So he knows if when people take things, it goes back to the saying, you can't take it with you.
Yep. The imagery, I don't know if you saw the original Left Behind series or
Yeah,
read the
I
books.
saw I saw the first one.
Okay. I read those when I was pretty young. I would probably say around 7 or 8. And the imagery has stuck with me ever since, where when the rapture happens, people instantaneously evaporate and their fillings are left on the top of the pile of their clothes, and any sort of like pacemakers they have would just be gone. And so it's the physical body that leaves and every other thing remains. And I don't think that's necessarily what happens here, but the imagery was just too good. And so that idea of, Brent's intent to hold on to it, he absolutely intended to hold on to it, but something along the way of like,
Yeah.
whether it's uh, I always imagined it as a lift, and they just kind of like gently go up, and then the body kind of relaxes, and then there's no reason to hold on to anything anymore. And so his transition point of like, I'm going to hold on to this. This is really important to me. No longer is important to him.
Yeah, exactly. It was funny because it took, the thing that took me a while to figure out, and I don't know why it took me a while, but when because he has this bowl of car keys, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, all those cars are parked, and he's got to move them or get rid of them, which is why they handed the keys over. Because if they didn't, how's he going to explain that? But I'm just glad that things like that just happened very, very quickly. It was the thing that Calvin had them repeat, because it says, the world offered its meaning to me in my weakness, and I said yes, but now I see the world as it truly is. And come dawn, I will give over the last of what I have not asked for, but whatever awaits me, I recognize peace is mine for the taking, and I'm ready to go home. Very profound words. Did you write that, or did it come from another writing?
Very flattering for you to say that. It is something that I wrote. Um, there was a lot of, I've always struggled with depression, and a lot of therapy has given me the words to kind of put into words the feelings that I've had. And when, again, that differentiation of, actively wanting to end your life and the idea of not having to wake up again. Uh, for me, it's two very different feelings. And so I just kind of was like, if I were to like summarize what this feeling is when I'm at the lowest, it's something similar to that. And so, um, yeah, it was something I put together pretty late in the draft, actually. That was one of the last things to come together.
It was really great because it was giving the other person the opportunity to back out.
Yes. Yes.
And I saw more of that in Brent's face than the others. And of course, you have to pay really close attention because Brent is another part of this story, and which we're going to get into. But I noticed that there were crosses in front of the cabin along the walkway. There was a cross hanging on the wall inside the cabin. So I knew Calvin, he knew that there was an afterlife, but he wasn't so sure if the afterlife was natural, possibly alien or terrestrial. So I love the open interpretation. And even that area, you must have gotten a lot of questions about.
Yes. The imagery, for those of you who are familiar, Grand Rapids is generally known as the Bible Belt of the North. Uh, in Jenison, we have more churches per square mile than almost anywhere else in the country. And that is an inescapable part of how a lot of people around here come to understand the world and who they are, whether it is they continue on in the church or they just went to vacation Bible school in the summer with their friends. There's a lot of Christian imagery around. And I think for people like Calvin, that imagery allows them to latch onto something, whether or not they are dogmatically in line with those represent to the Christians. There's peace and at least a sense of structure around those images that provide a lot of comfort for someone like Calvin who isn't sure. And I think this film is about people who aren't sure. And whether it is Brent or Calvin or his friend Chris, nobody has the answers. Nobody's certain. And everyone's just wanting to take the next steps of whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, this film for me is about empathy with people who you just don't understand. So there's a lot of conflict and tension of people trying to understand each other. What does this mean something? Does it not mean something? When it doesn't really, you don't have to understand the meaning of someone else's beliefs to know what it means to them and have respect for them. And then, like, rather than attacking the idea, listening to why they came to that belief in the first place.
You took the words right out of my mouth because as I'm looking at I literally picture the whole film in my head. It comes down to listening. Because, like, those that came to Calvin, they didn't, the look on their faces were like, I don't have anybody to talk to. And even though they weren't really explaining to Calvin what their issues were or why they chose to walk up the hill, it comes down as a message to us that we need to stop talking and we need to start listening and allow those people that may be dealing with things just to get it out. Because sometimes the most powerful thing that can be done is just to listen
Mm-hmm.
and not say anything and not try to figure it out, not try to actually help, but just to be there and listen. So I think that's a very powerful message in this film. And at the same time, if somebody's walking up that path to the cabin and they see those crosses, they're thinking in their mind when they see that, I wasn't the only one.
Yep. And also that whoever's gone has a family that cared enough to make something to remember them by. And so it's this tension of like, there's always, no matter how you feel, there's always someone that's going to miss you. And that's a very challenging feeling to acknowledge when you're going through something of that kind of struggle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big time. Because even Calvin says later in the film, with that exchange between him and Chris, it's not like I can leave. But see, deep down, he feels he either has a calling or he has a responsibility to be there for those who want to leave this life through this portal at the top of the hill. And but I think Chris was an interesting character because I kept as I was going through the whole sequence with Chris, it finally dawned on me why he was really there. Nobody came to visit Calvin ever. No, and but Chris used the birthday cake as an excuse to go see Chris because he knew Brent had been there. And Brent was
Bingo.
one of their long-term friends. You know, they had this high school band that they created, and Brent was one of the members. And Chris knew, it dawned on me, Chris knew that Brent had gone there. And the cake
Yep.
was just his excuse to try to make small talk, you know, but even Chris was dealing with his own issues.
Yes. And what I think was so interesting about Chris's journey was he came out of selfish intent. He wanted to just get closure, to get an answer, and ended up rekindling a part of him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. And that was similar to my experience writing this. The earlier drafts, it was not a friendship. It was kind of an older man and a kid. And as I was rewriting it, a friend who I hadn't talked to in over a decade uh, reached out and was like, "Hey, I'm going to be in town. You want to hang out?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that brought up so many emotions that I hadn't experienced before. I just put him in the script, and all of a sudden, uh, the character who's not the custodian is a friend from high school, and they have a band. And my friend and I, that is our recording in the scene. Like that's our literal. I was the drummer, he was the guitarist, and we put it in the movie. And those feelings were so interesting to me because I don't you don't often see movies dealing with this sense of long-term male friendship and disappointment and where we are in life and who we thought we'd be and who we're not. And so it just added a lot of layers without a lot of work on my end as a screenwriter. So I was just like, I don't have to figure out any of this. I'll just copy and paste from my life. And like you said, it just lends a richness to their experience.
Yeah, because it was that, you know, after they had a lot of fun in the cabin and playing the music really loud, but then there was that real quiet exchange, very deeply emotional. And then that's when I could see that Chris was there. He was there for a completely different reason. And and as Chris was getting ready to leave, he never noticed that Calvin was walking up the hill. Because in a way, it's like he was still caught up in his own issues, his own situation. And he's not seeing somebody else on the outside that's now making a decision. You know, so,
Yep.
but what I loved the ending of the film because Calvin's reaction at the top of the hill was very, very common. Because I looked at it and I went, oh, wow. People can be mad at the world or mad at God. Because you could see that look in Calvin's face. There was like this, it's a frustration, almost an anger type. But then in a split second, they just surrender. Then the look on his face when he saw the light was, you see the countenance on his face. It goes from awe to peace. And then the film goes on. And I'm curious because I love the way how that scene was written. I love the way how he had acted that part. How has the audiences interpreted the ending of this film?
So many different ways. And I like to say, um, Andrei Tarkovsky is one of my favorite directors, and he gets a lot of questions about the interpretation of his films. And he has a saying of, there are as many correct answers about what happens in this film as there are viewers. And so for the ending, it was explicitly, we worked really hard to not lean one way or the other as to what's happening. And there are people who are very confident in their answers. And I love that. Um, I changed my mind a couple times about what I actually think the ending was. And it is really rewarding to, walk that line with collaborators. Again, Michael B. Woods, just, he knew the character better than I did. And there are times when he gave a performance and I'm like, yep, that's it. Never dawned on me, but that's correct. And you know, it also tells a lot about the audience which way they believe the ending is. And I love, for me, when I see a film like Cold War or Portrait of a Lady on Fire or even Beau Travail, they have these really like in dramatic endings that are just these emotional bombs, and it makes you rethink everything that you've seen before that moment. And well, and the common example is the lobster, of when Colin Farrell's character leaves and there's a long delay. Like, does he come back or does he not? We don't know. The viewer gets to decide what they believe about the character. And so, in Calvin's perspective, does he go home? Does he stay? Um, the viewer gets to decide. And I just something I really enjoy about movies that get to do that.
Yeah, because it was funny because with Chris, because Chris was like, "You don't have to be here because you chose to be here. You can go home whenever you want." And which was a funny statement from Chris because Calvin was single, and in reality, he had no ties. He didn't really have to worry about money or whatever his situation was. Chris was like, I'm married. I got a kid. I got responsibilities, and I can't leave those responsibilities. But you can go home whenever you want. And so, in a way, Chris felt trapped,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't going to take the step to walk up the top of the hill because that's just not what he wanted to do, because he already knew Brent did it, and he was still wrestling, with that, because he couldn't even explain that, because, but see, that's where people have to pay attention to the dialogue in his film, because he says, Brent got married, but Brent got a divorce. And then when I heard the line, I went, wait a minute. Most people think divorce is a new beginning, but for a lot of people, divorce is actually the end. And then I got to thinking, did Brent think that way?
There's a lot to be like, the idea of home is different for everyone. And that was something, the name for this movie came early and it didn't change because, my last film was called Waffle Home. I didn't realize that I had a pattern here, but just that idea of like, what is home to people? And growing up in a Christian family, the idea of heaven being the true home, and everything's going to be better there. And there's a little bit of me as a kid where I was like, if it's better there, why are we waiting? If that's really what home is, like, come on, like, let's get the show on the road and go. And there's a tension there of, if you believe whatever comes next is better and it is your true home, you can go home. Technically, you can go home whenever you want. But there's a lot of people who still associate that with the earthly home and that sense of family. But really, home could be, Calvin has a home where he's at. It's a sense of purpose, of safety, of comfort, and he loves it there. Uh, and so the idea of one home being better than the other was on my mind a lot. And hopefully when people see this, they come to a sense that where it's home is whatever somebody wants it to be. And some of the most haunting feelings I've ever had is that idea of home being something that I don't have or can't attain in the near future. Um, and that is a really uncomfortable feeling. And
Yeah,
sorry.
and I picked that up in the film of what the basis of home is. And I got to thinking, the Apostle Paul said, to die is to gain, meaning there's a much better life awaiting for us. But in Paul's mind, it's not my time to go because my job is to take as many people with me when that time comes. Not that he's taking a group to heaven with him. What he's saying is, this is the message of the gospel. I'm leaving this with you. You accept it, then I know that you're going to be in the same home I am. So that's what he was focused on. So he didn't rush God's plan. But I like this film because it gets people to think on an eternal level, a natural level. Um, so this film, when I watched it, I was like, this film has got to create the most questions during a Q&A at a film festival than any of the other films I've ever seen. Because some of them you watch a short film and you're like, yeah, I get it, and there's nothing really to ask. You know,
Mhm.
uh, by your film, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the questions you get off of this one.
Yes. And kind of to the earlier point, the questions are usually a reflection of the person asking. And that in the right context, I always love to throw it back on the person who's asking the question and being like, that's a great question. Here's my thought. Out of the array of possible things you could have brought up, I find it really interesting that you brought this up. Thank you for that. Um, because you'll have people sometimes they'll have like a broad understanding of film and cinema and be like, oh, I saw all your references here, here, and here, and here, and here, and you're pulling from this, and their meaning is almost distorted because they're like, oh, you're just doing this that Tarkovsky did, you're just doing this that Schrader did, you're just doing whatever, whatever, and I'm like, technically, yeah, but like underneath it all, like I believe it, and then you'll have people who have never seen anything like that, who are just kind of almost looking for like a little bit of a buoy to hold on to, of like, there's a lot of feelings thrown at me, and I don't know what to do with them yet. Can you tell me what this movie means to you so that I can kind of like start processing things and know where to start? And it's honestly what's surprising to me is we got to release this online on a pretty big platform called Amuleto,
Oh yeah.
and I was very anxious about putting it out in the world, especially on the internet. I'm like, people are going to tear us apart. This is a movie that demands a lot of your attention and a lot of your heart and a lot of your brain, and our metrics are going to crash, and people are going to downvote it, and they're just not going to get it, and they're not going to even try. And I was like freaking out the night before it came out, and my wife reminded me, she's like, you don't know that whatever happens happens. And I was like, you're right, but also maybe it could be horrible. And she's like, just give it time. And I woke up and it was already uploaded, and all the comments were positive, and people were asking questions, and I'm like, this is. And by the end of the week, we had a way more views than I've had on any other of my previous work. And they were honestly, the comments on YouTube were more thoughtful than what I had gotten at film festivals.
Are really?
Yes, I think
Wow.
there's something about festivals that a certain type of person wants to engage with, and it's not the most vulnerable place to put your questions out there.
Yeah, you know what? A film festival question is going to be not everyone. Some people are basically trying to show their intellect to the person that made the film, and when it comes down to it, nobody cares. Okay, great, you're a student of film, but you're talking to a filmmaker. what film have you done? So if you haven't made a film yet, shut up.
There's
that's
such a
how I
lot.
think. Go ahead.
Yes, there's a lack of curiosity in the Q&A section. It's always lenses and cameras or something else along those lines of like, it's more of a quote than a question. And you're like, yeah,
Okay, you know why that is you know why that I'm going to say it. You know why that is stupid? I mean rarely do I ever ask what camera and what lenses. Here's what's so funny. When you talk to the director, most of the time, he doesn't even know. He goes, it's whatever the cinematographer I hired. Yeah, we went to go look at lenses or whatever. But when it comes down to the whole story, they won't remember by the time they're on set because that's the cinematographer's job. The only
yep.
time I ever ask the question is, did you shoot this on real film? Because usually, because sometimes, you can tell for the most part if it's real film or if it's digital. But of course, with the way post production is, some digital they do enhance a bit to give it that film look, but you can still tell the difference between if it's real or not.
Hmm.
I don't care what lenses somebody used. Now, if I talk to somebody and it was Cinescope or whatever, and they filmed in 16 millimeter, then I want to know why you chose to go the expensive
Yes.
route. What was your vision, to tell the story through real film? You went Cinescope or whatever, or some type of, you know, lens
VistaVision.
version. I don't care who made the lens, but if there was a reason why you used a particular lens, fine. But see, when those types of questions pop up at a film festival, ladies and gentlemen, in the end, nobody cares. But the only reason, but I'll say this, the one asking that type of question, they think it's important because they're making a side note. Okay, they use such and such. Okay, so they used an RE, they used Leica lenses. Okay, let me make a note. So if I do my short film, let me look into that. Maybe it was Nikon lenses. Okay, I get that. But when you're at a film festival, you pay attention to the storyline. If you're going to ask a question, focus on the storyline, focus on the cinematography, maybe the music score or the sound mixing, but leave the equipment questions at home.
Yes. I Part of the work I do with the Grand Rapids Film Society is help people who are just starting out, and getting people to stop focusing on gear is usually the first on my list of things that we have to take care of, because it is there's a lot of I have hypotheses about, you know, YouTube camera culture and tech and cool toys being like, it's really alluring. I love learning about the new cameras and stuff like that. But early people early in their career as filmmakers or cinephiles often look to gear when they should be asking about the more human character based questions of, like, as a director, how is it managing this many people on set? How did you pull this did you pull this performance out, or was it a collaboration? And those are the questions that you'll get better answers, and also are actually way more useful than knowing I need to shoot my next short on an ARRI, or, you know, use these lenses. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
like who hasn't used an RE? Who hasn't used a red? Okay, you know, if you really have to know, even on IMDb does not actually list what the details of the gear are when you look up a particular film. It's extremely rare if you see it. And then if someone has a question, look, just message the filmmaker on Instagram and ask that question, and then just take it as a personal question. If they answer it, you're like, oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. But if you're at a film festival, be a little bit more creative. Because for
mhm,
me, I'm like, so like we're working on a short film. So my deal is with the cinematographer is, okay, this is the look we want. This is the look we're going after. Okay. I don't care what equipment you plan on using to get that job done. I've seen your past work. That's why you got hired or you're asked to do this film. and then you work from there. And I'm going to ask you this because now it comes down to lighting and color palette, which the cinematographer basically wants to know because he knows what I should say. They know what they're focusing on for your film, so they're going to shoot it. So when you go into post, you add those layers. So like for you, explain the lighting of your film because you use the shade caused by the canopy of the forest. It's very calm, it's peaceful, even a feeling of security. So for you in this film, why was the lighting and the coloring so important in the telling of the story? That's a film festival question.
It is. I want to answer it well. And so I knew early on the color green was going to make or break this movie. Don't know how to explain it beyond that. I had seen Alex Garland's Men recently, and as a film, it's good. But the way that they got green to look on digital just blew me away. And then again, bringing up Andrei Tarkovsky, Stalker was a huge influence on the visual palette. And I knew if I could get the palette, then the emotions could live within that range. And so for me, it was more of the way previous films had allowed my feelings to interact. And so I am really good friends with our colorist. His name's Ryan Stemple, goes by Quicksilver Color out of Chicago. And I'd worked with him on Waffle Home and randomly found him online in our first phone call that you normally is kind of like this back and forth, like trying to figure each other out. We were nerding out about film stocks and the way that the Safdie Bros used like, I think it was like 2 perf, 632 on Good Time or something like that. And we're just off to the races. And so when I was working with this film, you can go home whenever you want. I had sent him some test shots, and he had developed a LUT for us so that we could see in camera what the color would look like. And then none of that mattered because 3 days before our shoot started, our DP dropped out. It was chaos.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
we this particular DP and I had been working for months. Uh, we had built the cabin to fit the lenses and the camera. We had been out to the location multiple times, like we were ready to go. And then something came up, and they were no longer able to make the first day of shooting. And I was like, we'll figure it out. They got an intern from a local school to come, and they filled in. And then at the end of that day, he sent me a picture of a positive COVID test. And since we're a SAG, well, even if we weren't a SAG set, we wouldn't shoot with him. But it was super, super clear, like there is no way to make this work with him. And so our first AD, her name's Mimi Angeli. We had called everyone else in town, and when they weren't able to make it with certainty, I just kind of took her aside at the end of the day, and I was like, "You ever wanted to shoot a short film?" And she's like, "I have." And I'm like, "Cool. You want to start tomorrow?" And she's like, uh, "I don't feel ready." And I'm like, "We'll get you there." And so that night, her and I went through the plots and the layouts and the what few I'm blanking on the word, the illustrations of the frames, storyboards. Yeah, and
Okay,
went
I
through the
was going to ask
storyboards,
if did you go storyboard or did you go shot list?
shot list.
Okay.
Uh, Again, because I had expected this DP uh, to be there with us, and we had printed out a whole bunch of comps from other films, and we're ready to go. And I was like, well, this I have to find a way to translate this. And to Mimi's credit, everyone, a lot of praise has gone to her camera work, and nobody knows that this was her literally at the last minute coming in and just crushing it.
Well, so what?
And
So what did
so,
you think that? What did you think of the first dailies that you watched?
so we had booked things in a way where we shot it chronologically. And so we started with, and there wasn't a lot of camera movement until the second and third day. And so the first day looked exactly like we needed it to be because it was a lot of static stuff. It was a lot of establishing. There was nothing too complex, and this was something that I had in my mind very strongly. And so I was able to. I've can't, operated cameras before, and so I could help out and have a strong hand there. And so we were good. Like we got lucky, and I felt good enough for day one. And then day two, there was a lot more dolly moves, some following shots. There's a lot more going on. And so Mimi just stepped in and just was a dream.
Wow. So let me ask you something because I'm going to use this shot as an example. So when you're looking directly at the cabin and you see the crosses on both sides of the walkway, um, there's a lot of heavy shadow. And so you have this beautiful, it's beautiful, the green tone. And when you're looking at that shot, were you also focusing on how the blacks were being represented in that shot?
Yes. Um, we chose that location for the richness of the image, where you're going to have the light coming through the clearing to hit the cabin. You're going to get the leaves of the trees. You're going to get the crosses, but you're also going to get a lot of dynamic range there, where it's not just pure sunlight hitting the leaves and you're washing things out. I love a rich image. I love crushing the shadows and crushing the blacks for all the people who are in color science out there. Um, I don't like a flat image. And so wherever we could, we really pushed to create a little bit of dynamic in those images.
So now tell me about, because this is, I really noticed this towards the end of the film. So you had an incredible music score. Who scored it?
We got so lucky. So our Dan Deacon did our score, and he's been to the Oscars for a documentary that he's done. He's worked on the Adam Sandler film Hustle. He just did the new Venom film, and he's doing great. But I met him 10 years ago at a show because he's also an indie musician, and he was touring on a old school bus that ran on fryer oil. And if you brought some old fryer oil, you get into the show for free. And if you brought enough, the band would cook you dinner. And I was obsessed with his music, brought in 20 gallons of fryer oil and had dinner with them. And so uh, when it came time to score this, I had been wanting to work with him forever. And I think this is our shot. We have the Sundance Institute behind us. Um, let's go for it. And so I cold emailed his agent and I said, here's the deal. I wrote a letter to Dan, included the photo that we had together, and said, I know this is a long shot, but I was curious if Dan would be interested in this. And 2 weeks later, he got back to me. He said Dan would be interested in this. And I think, just started crying, like just pure emotional release of, a dream coming true. And so Dan Deacon developed the score, and the song that was coming from the boombox that uh, Chris and Calvin were drinking to was our band from high school, and Dan took the chord progression from there and built the entire score around that. And so everything is pulled from that track, and he is just a miracle worker. He would ask like, okay, so what's the feeling here? And I'm like, I don't know, something like this. And he's like, okay, I'll come back with something else. And he's like, how do you want this to sound? I'm like, well, there's that the song Limp Bizkit recorded for the Mission Impossible soundtrack. At the end of the bridge, everything drops out and there's a snare hit, and it's the coolest sound on earth. And so I'd play it and he'd listen to it and he'd be like, got it. And then go back and just show me what he came up with. And it was exactly what I had in my head, even though I never was able to like show him. And so, yeah, it was one of the highlights of this experience.
Yeah, because I remember the music score when Calvin's walking up the hill at the end, because um, it's very dramatic. You know you're coming to the end, so it just plays so well together. Now, is this film, are you still in the film festival circuit?
We our last festival is happening in London next week. Um, we're on the tail end, and our year on the circuit's coming is wrapping up.
Okay. So what's next for you?
Oh, too many things. Uh, my wife and I are editing a short documentary about a local Rocky Horror Picture Show Shadowcast that has a lot to do with the themes that I love about performance, identity, meaning, life, and it comes out in these people, and they're truly wonderful. I'm very excited to have that. We're aiming to have that premiere in October, so a lot of work there to do. And then there's a short I'm writing now, basically just to work with Michael again, and it's an adaptation of a Jorge Luis Borges short story. So it's the first time I'm adapting something. And then also working on a feature film called Strung Out, which is about the intersection of music, string theory, and art. That is a naughty, peculiar thing that I'm wrestling with.
I love that. Yeah, I just love creativity. And I think with filmmakers, it's okay to be doing more than one thing because you never know when you get it done and you never know when it's coming out. So, it's kind of job security, but we all know that funding plays a big part in that. So,
Oh, yeah.
but ladies and gentlemen, a recluse has been living off the grid for a number of years, isolated from society. But for the people who seek him out, he lives at the base of a hill, which may or may not be a conduit to the next life. But those who want to ascend the hill check in with the recluse, Calvin, that we've been talking about. And then when they walk to the other side, they disappear, never to be seen again. You can go home whenever you want brings up the topics of transcendence, mortality, and the role that human existence even causes one to think about the meaning of life. Questions of should I stay or should I go? If the road becomes tough, do I check out or do I stick it out? You Can Go Home Whenever You Want is a film I like because it causes us to think about many things. And when you watch the film, you are focused on the actors, their embodiment of the human experience, truly the depths of life itself. Matthew, I want to thank you so much for sharing your film with me today.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be on your show, and you're one of the better interviewers, if not the best, I've had the pleasure of working with.
Oh, well, I appreciate that compliment. So very, very kind of you. And ladies and gentlemen, please visit us at bondoncinema.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Prime episodes as well. And as for me, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.